The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Today I thought I'd talk about sympathy. There are a lot of calls for sympathy in our world at this moment. There's all, forest fires, other wildfires, COVID, all the kind of things, heat, flood, so many things that feel like a call for our sympathy and our help. When we hear of somebody's misfortune, the death of a child, or they've lost their house, or their whole town, or something like that, we want to express our sympathy. And you might say something like, I just can't imagine what that must be like. I've said this often, I know, meaning that I've never experienced this kind of loss. I don't know what it's like to lose a child. I don't know what it's like to lose one's whole town. But somebody pointed out recently that actually this doesn't really help the person. It can make them feel kind of cut off. I don't know what it's like, and that they're on their own. Nobody can sympathize with this. Nobody knows. We don't understand. They're on their own. So they said actually it's much better to say, I can only imagine what that must be like. Well, I've been thinking about this, and of course they're right. At first I thought, well, I can't imagine what it's like actually. But actually thinking about it, I found this really helpful. True sympathy means that we're willing to feel with the person, to try to imagine what it's like to go through what they've gone through, even if we haven't been through it ourselves. Feeling with, because that's the meaning of sympathy, the willingness to feel with, to try to imagine what it's like, not to say, well, I have no idea what that's like. Although that may not be our intention, that's how it can sometimes come across. So I'm not trying not anymore to say, I can't imagine what that's like, because it has the opposite intention from what I wished, So I'm really grateful for having this explained, because I want to feel with the person, even if I don't feel I'm qualified. And I think that's part of it, feeling we're not qualified to say, I can only imagine what it's like, to say we can even try to imagine what it's like, to have gone through some terrible loss. It's like, I don't know, But feeling we're not qualified actually is it's like a self. I don't understand. I don't know what this is like. In fact, we've all had losses and grief in one way or another. Everybody has suffering. Even if it seems like just a little suffering, we can imagine what it's like. Even on a little scale, we can try to kind of bridge that seeming gap between me, who hasn't had this experience, and that other person over there who knows what it's like, And I think it's a kind of inadequacy, thinking, well, I don't know what that's like, I'm just this little sort of inexperienced worm, It doesn't really help. Sympathy is one of the four wisdoms, as Dogen points out, along with charity, tenderness, and benevolence. And they all kind of work together. Charity, giving, tenderness, kindly speech, benevolence, wishing well. And they all go together with sympathy. They all work together. Ways of treating other people as though they were us, as though we were not separate in any way. Because of course we're not. And great Master Dogen in the Shishoki, he says about sympathy, if one can identify oneself with that which is not oneself, one can understand the true meaning of sympathy. Take, for example, the fact that the Buddha appeared in the human world in the form of a human being. This is the Buddha's sympathy, just being a human being. Sympathy does not distinguish between oneself and others. There are times when the self is infinite and times when this is true of others. Sympathy is as the sea, in that it never refuses water, from whatsoever source it may come. All waters may gather and form only one sea. Just beautiful section. To identify oneself with that which is not oneself. This is exactly what is meant by being willing to imagine what it's like to be another person, to have gone through what they've gone through, no matter what it may be, or no matter what the person may be like, to try to imagine what it's like to be them. I've talked with a great many people who have gone through a great many different kinds of things. A lot of it dreadful suffering I've never experienced. Sometimes it's long ago as children, sometimes more recent, sometimes it's fear of what may come. And I try to put myself in their shoes, knowing that they may not fit, because I may not have had that experience myself, but try to imagine what it's like to be them. Trying to see things from their point of view. Otherwise you can't help if you don't try to see things from that person's point of view. And often simply listening is all we need to do when somebody tells us something, whether we're doing it in a formal way or whether we're just listening to a friend telling us about something that's happened to them. Sometimes just listening. We don't even have to say anything maybe. Or if we do, maybe you're not necessarily asking for advice. Sometimes they just want someone to be an ear. A big ear, as Reverend Master Gio used to say. Just to listen with an open heart, with that big ear, with sympathy, so we can really hear, what is it like to be them? Well, sympathy isn't only about people who've had great suffering. We also need to practice sympathy with people we might not agree with, people with different views, people we don't like, people who do terrible things. Can we sympathize with them? Can we sympathize with people with political views we don't like? Can we sympathize with people who've done dreadful things, people who grab from other people? Can we sympathize with them? Try to understand what it's like for them. To sympathize with someone who's been brought up to hate and even kill people of other religions or other races. Can we try to imagine what it's like to be them? How would we do if we were in their position, if we'd been raised that way? How would we do? Would we do much better? We don't know, They're not that different from us. They just had different circumstances, born into a different situation, raised in a different way, different karma that they've inherited. We don't know. Just not to cut people off because I don't know what they're like. That's quite different. I don't have that experience. I would never do that kind of thing. We don't know. To identify oneself with that which is not oneself. We're not separate at all. As Dogen says, sympathy does not distinguish between oneself and others. To say, well, I'm like this and they're like that. No matter how different we may feel we are, really, we're not all that different. How would we do in that situation? Can we sympathize with somebody who grabs money and power at the expense of other people? We keep seeing, you see examples of this every day. People who seem to have huge amounts of wealth and power and yet they still want more, and often at the expense of others. Can we sympathize with someone like that? How could they do that, at the expense of all these little people who don't have very much? Well, there's fear there. Can we sympathize with that fear? We all know fear. And sometimes it just gets out of hand with somebody and they don't want to look at what they're doing, Can we sympathize with somebody like that? To understand, to sympathize with fear, we all have that. But it may not all act in that way. True sympathy does not judge. I think that's the thing. It does not judge. You can't really sympathize with somebody, feel with them, if you're judging them and criticizing them in your own mind. We might not like what somebody's doing, but we don't have to cut that person off, condemn them or hate them, or think we're separate from them, or even better than them. We don't know how we would be if we had what they have. or think we're worse than them. Comparing ourselves with others, it doesn't really make any sense at all. We've all got greed, hatred, ignorance, plenty of it. We all have our karmic burdens to bear, plenty of them. Everybody has different stuff. We cannot judge another person. But our job is to do the best we can with what we have, to do our best with what has come our way, and not to make a judgment about another person. Not judging others for what they do. We may not want to do what they do, and we may need to do something about it, but we don't have to cut them off. And it's not always easy. When you hear about some dreadful thing that somebody's done, we can have this sort of angry, righteous impulse. How could they do that? That's just awful, And then we might think, well, I don't know what it's like to be them. I don't think it's a good thing. Maybe I need to do something about it. Maybe I need to take some political action or make some statement or do something, no matter whether it's a small thing or a big thing. I might need to do something. Doesn't mean we don't do anything. But we don't have to hate the person. We don't have to cut them off and say, I'm not like that. I would never do that. We don't have to have that angry and judgmental mind. Because if we knew everything about another person, we couldn't judge them at all. The more you know about somebody, the less you can judge, the more you sympathize, because you have a sense of what they're dealing with. Quite different from judgment. Dogen says, there are times when it's about sympathy. There are times when the self is infinite, and times when this is true of others. We can understand this in various ways. Times when the self is infinite. Sometimes our own selfishness seems to be infinite, huge selfishness. Sometimes we're greedy and angry and deluded, and we seem to be just, not what we'd want to be. We do that. Sometimes other people are like that. Or sometimes we may have infinite sympathy. Sometimes the self is infinite. Sometimes our sympathy can be infinite. Just all-embracing sympathy. And sometimes other people are like that. Because everybody has both of these aspects. Either way, we're not so different from each other. Everybody is capable of extreme selfishness, including us. Everybody is capable of extreme, great compassion, kindness, sympathy, including us. Both ways, we all have that mix of the positive and the not so positive. What we think is good, what is good to do and what are not good to do. We all have that mixture. It's what we do with it that makes a difference. What we do with it. Not how we judge it, but what we do with it. How do I live my life? And if I need to do something about something in the world, fine. Just try not to do it with an angry and righteous mind, because that doesn't help so much. Sympathy is as the sea, in that it never refuses water, from whatsoever source it may come. All waters may gather and form only one sea. It's lovely. True sympathy. It doesn't exclude anyone. Nothing refused, no matter who they may be. Never refuses water, from whatsoever source it may come. Nobody is unworthy of our sympathy, Another aspect of sympathy is sympathetic joy. It's one of the Brahma Viharas, the great illimitable minds, along with loving kindness, compassion, and equanimity. They're all limitless, the four divine abodes, the limitless divine abodes. All of those minds, loving kindness is limitless, compassion is limitless, equanimity, limitless, and sympathetic joy, taking joy in somebody else's good fortune, it's limitless. And it's a great antidote to envy and jealousy, to which some of us may be a little prone. If you feel envious or resentful or anything like that, sympathetic joy when you see somebody's good fortune, and to practice it with somebody we don't happen to like too much or maybe be envious of, to do our best to practice sympathetic joy, not as a kind of pretend thing, but something to cultivate. Can I actually feel joy with this person? Because we're all connected, other people's sorrow affects us. You cannot be happy when everybody else is not happy. You cannot be having a party when other people all around you are miserable. You really cannot do it, you know. And the same with joy, actually. If somebody is happy, it does affect us. To say, oh, I don't like it, they're having a good time, that's just not fair. Look how awful they've been, they're having things have worked out well for them. You know, that's a dismal, ridiculous state of mind, actually. To be sincerely glad when somebody else has blessing and good fortune is a great blessing for us too, because we are part of them, they are part of us. The sorrows of the world are our sorrows. The joys of the world are our joys. It's like that invocation of Ramata Koten's. You weep at the Kanzeon, you weep in all the sorrows of the world, rejoice in all its joys. Not just weeping in the sorrows, but also rejoicing in the joys of the world. And then rejoice in all the sorrows of the world and weep in all its joys, because actually it's all connected. There's no sorrow without some happiness along with, and no happiness without some sorrow. It's all mixed up together. You can't be completely wretched forever. Joy has to come somewhere, you know. And you can't be completely joyful forever. It doesn't last forever, you know, things go wrong. But it all works together. Joy and sorrow, just part of the great tapestry of our life. We are all connected, nothing separate. So we feel somebody else's sorrow, we feel their joy. And to actually open the heart and rejoice in somebody else's good fortune is, I said, a blessing for us. It's a way of being generous, practicing generosity and loving kindness. All those attributes, they all work together, you know. If you're sympathetic, you're also being generous. You're being generous with your own heart, you know. Not just saying, well, I don't know what that's like, I'm just going to, you know. But how can I understand? How can I understand whether it's a joyful thing or a sorrowful thing that this person is going through? Can I open my heart to that? Know that I'm connected with that. Whether I like this person, whether I know this person or I don't. Can I actually open my heart and feel with them? Sympathy, feeling with, you know. And in all these ways there is this immeasurable aspect of sympathy, the boundlessness of sympathy, feeling with others, because the sort of seeming limits of ourself is not real. We are limitless because we're with everybody else. We're all limitless. We all interpenetrate. None of us actually is separate in any way at all, in any of the possible ways of looking at it. Physically, you know, we're all breathing in and out molecules and losing little bits of skin everywhere and all that kind of thing, and food comes in and goes out. There's no limit, actually. I mean, it's not this little shell of self at all. It leaks all the time. Sympathy never refuses water. It never refuses anything. It never refuses itself to another person. May we practice this, deeply sympathizing with others, because we're also completely connected. We're all part of that one great sea. And the more we practice sympathy in all its many ways, the more we make it true for ourselves, the more we know it for ourselves, that we're all actually part of that great matter, that great sea of Buddha nature, however we want to put it. That's our little talk for the day. And thank you for coming. Thank you. It's nice to see you.